Okay, great. So now we're gonna have some fun. Today is it's entitled Revolution and Racial Justice. We finished our um, discussion of Locke. We talked about Locke's lineage in the American founding, and now we're gonna see Locke in a new light, but nevertheless the same one in the middle of the 20th century during the Black freedom struggle. And so to remind ourselves a little bit of some of the sort of themes from Locke. I pulled this quote from the second treatise, and then it goes like this. It says, "In transgressing the law of nature," so we're talking about some sort of criminal or somebody who has violated the sanctity of community um, or just life, right? And so in transgressing the law of nature, and as a reminder, the law of nature is that everyone has rights to life, liberty, and property. The offender declares himself to live by another rule than that of reason and common equity. Upon this ground, or actually, I will read the whole quote and then we can get there. So this is what it says. In transgressing the law of nature, the offender declares himself to live by another rule than that of reason and common equity, which is that measure God has set to the actions of men for their mutual security. And so he becomes dangerous to mankind. The tie, which is to secure them from injury and violence, being slighted and broken by him, which being a transpass against the whole species and the peace and safety of it, provided for by the law of nature, every man upon this score, by the right he hath to preserve mankind in general, may restrain or where it is necessary, destroy things noxious to them, and so may bring such evil on any one who hath transgressed that law, as may make him repent the doing of it, and thereby deter him, and by his example others, from doing like mischief. And in this case, and upon this ground, every man hath a right to punish the offender and be the executioner of the law of nature. And so what is Locke saying here? Locke is saying that it is incumbent upon us to uphold the law of nature, that it is by this reason why we engage in revolution when governments are betraying our trust, taking away our rights, tending towards tyranny, etc. But also, it is incumbent upon us to protect our own rights. That if our rights are being threatened, not only by government, but by others, by groups of people, by your neighbors, by your enemies, by your friends, you have a right to protect your rights, right? So like that person's right to liberty, that person's right to life has been thrown away by violating yours. So we enter into a new sort of paradigm. Once there's been a violation of the law of nature, then retribution can follow. That is it's allowed and it is incumbent upon you to do so, right? It's important for you to stand up for yourself. And so we will see this be an example of we will see Locke's call to us be taken up not only by the revolutionaries of early America, but also by members of the Black freedom struggle in the 20th century. So this is the movement of the 1950s and 60s, and we're going to see many of the ideas of the course at work. So we're going to go in order of Malcolm X and then to MLK. Malcolm's the older, represents more the northern upper poor working class perspective, and MLK is younger, represents a more southern middle class perspective. So the immediate context of this film that I'm going to show, this really brief sort of interview, but also the work that I'm drawing most of this from, the work is called The Ballot or the Bullet. It was a speech that he gave. And this speech was given right after his split, Malcolm X's split with the Nation of Islam. And he moved into a much more secular humanist argument for the Black freedom struggle. And so the speech, The Ballot or the Bullet, he gives a speech in 1964, right as the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is being considered on the floor of Congress. And if you guys remember, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 kind of shored up the 15th Amendment, right? So after the Civil War, Blacks were given the right to vote. And yet in the South, this was a sort of, this wasn't effectively, this was not a right, right? Because the right was there, but there was grandfather clauses, there was poll taxes, there was white people standing outside of the of the ballot box with firearms. There was a general aura of like, if you vote, you will be lynched. If you vote, we will not let you vote. That was essentially the way of the world in the South. And so in 1964, an act was passed that made illegal most of these activities. We will see that it's, and until now, there's been a sort of mixed implementation of these rules and these laws, but most people look back upon 1964 as a sort of when the civil war effectively was actually won, right? The famous saying is that the North won the Civil War, but the South won Reconstruction. Effectively, the South won the war up until the last 50 years, the last 60 years or so odd years. That's like a very sort of common interpretation of the history of the Civil War in this country, is that effectively the South got what they wanted, which is racial domination in their space. So this is the context, right? This is the context of Malcolm X giving the speech. This is the context of this short interview I'm going to be showing. Part of the controversy is whether voting rights should be a part of the bill. Civil rights includes voting rights. That's often what we think of as synonymous, but there were other parts of the Civil Rights Act that many people thought were more important. What's the importance of political rights when your right to life is being threatened? Who cares about voting, our right to vote, when we can't even get a job, right? These are the sorts of debates that were kind of happening at the time. Black militants wanted no compromise on this point. What ends up happening is LBJ, the president, punts that portion of the act. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 didn't really have a whole lot of voting rights protections in it. But LBJ punted that for another year. 1965 is actually when the bill got passed that sort of shored up the voting rights part. But so that's the context. I will now show this brief film. Let me see if I can pull it up really quickly. I guess I should have tested this to see if the sound will work, but let's see.
Challenge welcomes the outspoken.
Can you guys hear this?
Yeah, it works.
X.
Yep.
Sir, what's the real reason why you two men split? Is it merely ideological, or is it personality? What else?
Probably personality. It was not the statement that originally was given by the movement when we split. It's more personality than anything else.
You've called people like Martin Luther King, who just got a Nobel Peace Prize, an Uncle Tom. Is this correct, first?
Well, I'd rather say that in the States, there's a law that has recently been passed, or a decision handed down by the court, wherein if you call someone an Uncle Tom, they can sue you for libel.
Well,
so I never refer to them as Uncle Toms. I would say that Uncle Martin is my friend.
Uncle Martin is your friend, yet you would disagree with his approach to what he wants to accomplish.
Definitely. If his approach would bring about what the black man in America needs to completely eliminate the problem that we have, I would say well and good. But I very much doubt that anyone who adopts the approach that Martin Luther King has been teaching to our people in that country can point to any meaningful gains that has actually served to solve the problem.
Black Muslims have sometimes, whether you have or not, and I think probably you have sometimes, it seemed to me, been preaching hate to meet hate.
I don't advocate any kind of hate.
But there's a lot of talk that sounds very much like it.
No, I think that the guilt complex of the American white man is so profound until when you begin to analyze the real condition of the black man in America, instead of the American white man eliminating the causes that create that condition, he tries to cover it up by accusing his accusers of teaching hate. But actually, they're just exposing him for being responsible for what exists.
Well, that's something of an argument, but I've heard speeches made by some of the people of your group. I think I've heard you make speeches. It seemed to me that you were advocating, well, I would have to describe, I think, as violence to meet the serious injuries that have been done your people, with which I totally agree.
I don't call that violence. I don't in any way encourage black people to go out and initiate acts of aggression indiscriminately against whites. But I do believe that the black man in the United States and any human being, anywhere, is well within his right to do whatever is necessary, by any means necessary, to protect his life and property, especially in a country where the federal government itself has proven that it is either unable or unwilling to protect the lives and property of those human beings.
Just before Pierre takes it, you've got a pretty good fighter and the world's heavyweight champion lined up with you to help out. Yes, Pierre.
Well, Mr. X, if I guess I call you that, is that the proper appellation,
Yes.
Mr. X? I'm wondering if you still believe, as I think you certainly did at the time you were allied to the black Muslim movement, in a segregated black nation in North America.
I don't believe in any form of segregation or any form of racism. I'm against any form of segregation and against racism.
Am I right in saying that the black Muslim movement, which you have left, did believe in that?
Well, Elijah Muhammad taught his followers that the only solution was a separate state for black people. And as long as I thought he genuinely believed that himself, I believed in him and believed in his solution. But when I began to doubt that he himself believed that that was feasible, and I saw no kind of action designed to bring it into existence or bring it about, then I turned in a different direction.
Are you still a Muslim yourself?
Oh, yes. I'm a Muslim. I believe in the religion of Islam, which believes in brotherhood, complete brotherhood of all people. But at the same time that I believe in this brotherhood, I don't believe in forcing my desire for brotherhood upon those who aren't willing to accept it.
Of course, I think the Christians would say that they also believed in brotherhood. What did you say to that?
I'd say they believe in it, but don't practice it.
That'd be a pretty good answer.
Sir, when the muezzin goes up in the minaret twice a day, he cries to the world, there is but one God, and he is Allah. Do you deny that there is a Christian God?
The muezzin does this 5 times a day.
5 times, and I only heard him twice.
Well, you were fortunate to hear him twice. But he does this 5 times a day, and the same God that he says that he expresses the existence of is the God that the Christians profess to believe in themselves, and the God that the Jews believe in. One God, the creator of the universe. The Muslims believe in the God that created the universe, and I think the Christians do, and the Jews do. Now, as long as all of them are talking about the creator, the Jews may call him Jehovah, and Christians may have another name for him. Those who are Arabic speaking refer to him as Allah. Well, we believe in the same God.
Now, as the Muslim religion advances in the United States, are you modernizing it or sticking with the old faiths? For example, the complete segregation of the sexes.
I think that everything today on this earth is being modernized. Religious principles and practices, as well as political and other things.
Now, when you went to Mecca, this is a very sacred and forbidden city. I tried to get to Mecca myself and certainly didn't make it, not being a Muslim. But how would they accept you as one? You're an American. There are few American Muslims.
This is true, and by being an American and not having not being able to speak the Arabic language, I did strike a snag, a very serious snag, but I was fortunate to have been pretty well known by the officials in Arabia, and they knew too that I had accepted Orthodox Islam. It had been highly publicized in the paper, and I became a guest of the state. I was a guest of Prince Faisal, the present King Faisal, and they made it possible for me to go before the committee, Hajj committee or Hajj court, who examines you and asks you questions about your belief, and if you pass it, then you are okay to go to Mecca. But it's
You would
true.
have to have a translator then.
Oh, I had one. Then realizing that our problem in America, that we are black Americans, and we have a problem that goes beyond religion, we formed a group known as the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And the objective of this organization, it's non-religious, number one. Any Negro can belong to it. And the objective of that organization is to bring about a condition that will guarantee respect and recognition of the 22 million black Americans as human beings. We feel that the problem, number one, of the black man in America is beyond America's ability to solve. It's a human problem, not an American problem or a Negro problem. And as a human problem or a world problem, we feel that it should be taken out of the jurisdiction of the United States government and the United States courts and taken into the United Nations in the same manner that the problems of the black man in South Africa, Angola, and other parts of the world, and even the way they're trying to bring the problems of the Jews in Russia into the United Nations because of violation of human rights. We believe that our problem is one not a violation of civil rights, but a violation of human rights. Not only are we denied the right to be a citizen in the United States, we're denied the right to be a human being.
Well, Mr. X, may I thank you very much for coming on our program and perhaps clearing away some of the cobwebs of misconception that some of us might have had about your belief. And I think you're a very sincere man, and it takes a lot of courage to admit a former belief is wrong, and we congratulate you for that and the service you performed tonight in giving us your views. Thank you so much, Mr.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. There we go. So, what did you guys think about that?
Mr. Moderator, Reverend Clee.
There's something else playing, Brian.
Milt.
Yeah, I closed it. There we go.
That
Did
dude's
that
a
strike
boss.
you with
I
anything?
like that guy. Yeah, I really like his,
What about it?
I don't know, that one. Well, the one-liner, the concept of like, nah, I don't believe in advocating violence, and I don't believe in like starting shit. But
Okay.
the second that you infringe on someone's ability to like protect their property and their lives, like get fucked, and we're gonna come for you.
Yes, right. And then so like you could tell that the interviewer is responding to, perhaps selected times where Malcolm X certainly was advocating, what that interview called violence, because, that's what you guys know about Malcolm X.
Sure.
That's what we all remember or like are taught about Malcolm X is he's like MLK, but he advocates violence as well. But as you can see, what he was describing there was a sort of reactive, if you want to use the word violence, you can, but it's a sort of reaction to a transgression, which is, we heard that before. We've heard this idea before, right? He's getting this from,
Sure. Locke.
right. He's getting this from an American tradition of political thought, right?
Yeah,
What else?
no.
Did anything else come up for you guys?
What was interesting was that like I don't and look, I think I'm pretty ignorant with like recent American history, so like this
Yeah.
type of stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't know who a lot of these obviously I've heard of Malcolm X, but I don't know who the interviewer was, but it was interesting because it almost felt like that dude was like he was trying to play nice, and he was like, yeah, look, I'm not a racist, but also I felt like there was this kind of like inherent like, I don't know if judgment is the right word, but like there was some undertones that I picked up on where the dude like, I don't think looked down on is the right way to say it, but case in point, like the thing you just brought up when he said about like the violence. Well, listen, man, I've literally heard you talk about violence myself, bro. Like you're fucking
Right.
advocating for violence. So it was interesting because obviously this guy, Malcolm X, was a big enough voice that this white guy is willing to give him airtime on whatever show that was. But it was also evident to me that he kind of looked at him as like a little bit of a miscreant or like a radical.
There's definitely like some paternalism that I think you're sort of sensing, like, yeah,
Sure.
and that's really good. I think that tone is like a very common tone that Black people get talked to. It's a sort of like, oh, I'm gonna listen, I'm gonna hear you out and listen to you.
Sure.
But the bar is going to be really high for you to clear in order for you to change my mind about you.
Yeah, sure.
I think that's
sure.
a really common orientation.
Well, and it wasn't even like the bar is high for you to change my mind. It was more like going in with these presuppositions that like, yeah, okay, like you saying you're not violent, but like let's get real. We both know you're a violent motherfucker.
Mm-hmm.
So it was more than a high bar. It was also like the dude was like, yeah, you're fucked up, but like I don't know, maybe that was kind of what I picked up on.
Are there any other thoughts about this little thing we watched?
I have a thought.
Yeah.
Speaking of violence, I thought it was interesting that he was like, no, we're not, I'm not advising Black Americans to be violent, instead of being like, well, what about the violence that you have shown towards like Black Americans in the US? Like
Mhm.
why he didn't like retort with that instead of
Mm.
how in my opinion peaceful he was with his response.
You can tell he was kind of holding back or something.
I don't know if holding back, maybe it was scripted, like he knows what to say in these situations,
Okay,
but
yeah, he was prepared. Yeah,
yeah.
Well,
cool. Yeah,
I
go ahead.
I was just saying I noticed that the guy was talking about protecting his property. He was talking
Yeah,
about what we have been talking about. Like he was advocating. It was like, no, I don't believe in violence, but like I believe in what our basic human rights are, which is you gotta protect your shit. So I know
yeah,
Howard kind of already touched on that, but it was just more of a callback to what we have been learning already.
totally, exactly. That's the point. That was the point of showing that is to like, is to bring that out. I can't watch stuff like that without hearing Locke, and I think that's the point. So as far as like the actual like the work, so this is probably Malcolm X's most famous like work. It's on YouTube. It's a whole speech. Uh, it's usually like the first thing that's on a like in a collected works volume of Malcolm X. You'll find this speech. A really famous speech. It's entitled "The Ballot or the Bullet," and among the numerous things that he says in it, he says quite literally this: that this year it will be the ballot or the bullet. And I wonder if just by saying that, can you guys sort of articulate what his point is? What does that mean? The
Yeah,
ballot.
like give us our fucking rights and treat us like equals, or we're gonna fucking come for you with guns.
Hell yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Dude, I really like this guy. This dude's dope.
Right. And so I don't know about, I don't know if the gun part is like, you know, inherent, but like,
He literally says bullet. What do
I
you
know,
mean?
but
It's not, it's,
if that's what makes it alive for you, then go ahead. I think the
no,
bullet
I'm
is a
not.
stand-in
That's not what I'm
for
honing in on. I'm honing in on. Here's what I like
violence
about
or
this
something.
dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, of course. What I like about this dude, it's not like, oh, he likes guns too. Ho ho ho.
Okay. Yeah.
It's the fact that here you have someone that's found a way to juxtapose racial equity with protection of private property
Yeah.
and and bringing in those like Lockean ideals
That's right.
of like self-preservation as opposed to like big bad, big good daddy government saving the day. Like
As opposed, right. Yeah.
this dude's right up my alley, bro. And I like the fact that he finds a way to, again, like that juxtaposition of the racial equity, and like he's like, yeah, like there is such thing as freedom and equity for all people, but like let's get real, like the government ain't it, and it's up to us as individuals and as a collective society to make that shit happen and protect our private property.
Hmm. Yeah. And so, yeah, that's really good. And I think that juxtaposition, I think is, I don't want to comment on like one or the other, but I think it's true that like Malcolm X is an example of a different route than um
Then Black Lives Matter and fucking Martin Luther
well, I'm
King and
not
all
sure.
these other things.
I'm not sure about that. But like there's a numerous routes you can take. I actually think Black Lives Matter shares a lineage, but like,
Yeah, but it's been so
we can
perverted.
actually,
Okay.
we can
Yeah,
discuss
we
that
don't have to
in a
get
second
sure.
once we do that in a
Sure.
second.
Oh,
But
I
so
have a question.
go ahead. Yeah.
Was the purpose of this interview for him to just talk about that he wants, Black Americans to have property? Was that the whole purpose of this interview?
The purpose was for him to explain his split from the Muslim Brotherhood. It was a
Oh.
sort of like a big deal. Like he was well known as a sort of Black militant leader of a Muslim group, and he kind of publicly split with Elijah Muhammad. And the history of that is that Elijah Muhammad, there was some like allegations of like improper relations with women. He was against this sort of like integration of women into equal roles within the group. He said in this interview that the sort of black nationalism, the sort of like founding of a black a country was a plan for the Nation of Islam, but was not. Malcolm X began to doubt that Elijah Muhammad actually thought that was going to be feasible. There's a bunch of reasons that why Malcolm X ended up splitting, and he moved into a more sort of secular humanist, but nonetheless black nationalist type of political organization. So that was the reason for the interview. There was a sort of like, oh, Malcolm X is no longer Muslim, and he's on there saying like, no, I'm still a Muslim. I'm just no longer a part of this sexist organization that I frankly disagree with. That was like the point. But your question about like property, Malcolm is sort of revealing himself to be a Lockean, right? That's the sort of argument that I'm making. That like he believes in a sort of natural right to property, and that violating that, because blacks in this country have been sort of systematically prevented from acquiring property, whether that's through unfair redlining. They have a different experience of property accumulation than whites, and I don't think that's controversial to say. But Malcolm finds this to be a violation of human rights, as opposed, and that's to say nothing of violations of right of life and liberty, right? Which he would also say is, but he places property on the same line as life and liberty, which is, as does Locke. Let's see. Anything else before we talk about this quote? So Dixiecrats are Southern Democrats, right? So that like it's a sort of word that obviously doesn't get used anymore, but because Democrats are a certain thing and Republicans are a certain thing. But during this period of time, the Democrats were very much the party of the South, the party of racial segregation, the party of domination over blacks, the party of racial oppression, right? This is, uncontroversial to say this. And so so Malcolm is here pointing out that the Dixiecrats in Washington, D.C. actually have outsized influence in Washington, that their representation, like the representation of Southern Democrats, overrides Northern Republicans or even Northern Democrats. Why is that? What does he say here? He says that because blacks can't vote. So blacks in the South can't vote. So the South effectively becomes a sort of racial white enclave of political power, right? So the only people ever getting elected are the sort of racist whites from the South. And so they've been elected forever, as long as they possibly can. And committees in Washington, D.C., who holds the power is often down to who's been there the longest, right? So the committee chairships get passed down by seniority. And so when you have this sort of like power center coming from the South of all the same types of people, all voting the same types of way, you end up with these extremely senior folks that have the most power. So the political zeitgeist of America, from the end of the Civil War until this period, was one of Southern white domination. The South won the war, guys, is effectively, the wisdom here. The South won the war. And so this is what he says. He said the Dixiecrats in Washington, D.C. control the key committees that run the government. The only reason Dixiecrats control these committees is because they have seniority. The only reason they have seniority is because they came from states where Negroes can't vote. This is not even a government that is based on democracy. Half of the people in the South can't even vote. And again, I would just ask you, where have we seen this kind of argument before? You know, and so like the unsaid conclusion of this argument is something like, you know, like our government is tending towards tyranny, right? That would be something that is not said here, but it's sort of implied. And so therefore we need to enact a revolution, right? This is Locke, guys. You know, this is Locke's theory of legitimacy and consent of the governed. Locke's theory of violations of these things tending that allow the citizenry to enact a revolution, to make the government in their own image, right? And so he goes on to say, you know, basically what you guys have already determined. This is the point of the speech. That's why in 1964, it's time for you and me to become more politically mature and realize what the ballot is for. And that if we don't cast a ballot, it's going to end up in a situation where we're going to have to cast a bullet. It'll be ballots or it'll be bullets. It will be liberty or it will be death. We've already discussed this. This is where I ask you, what is his argument here? You guys know this argument. I don't have to beat it over your head for you. And so again, we're going to get back to this idea of the Afro-Americans' right to self-defense. We assert that in those areas where the government is either unable or unwilling to protect the lives and property of our people, that our people are within their rights to protect themselves by whatever means necessary. And finally, Malcolm has this idea of expanding, of reaching beyond the United States government. It's not an appeal to government for recognition or like you guys need to pass a law that will secure our rights. Oftentimes in Malcolm X, he is sort of advocating one for self-reliance, of course, as we've seen, but also for a humanity reliance, right? As it's an appeal towards the global human, to sort of recognize human rights as all of our rights, right? And he's able to sort of see past the government as a grantor of rights, which I think is it's certainly a Lockean idea, right? Locke is the guy that says the government does not grant you your rights. The government can protect your rights, but your rights are God-given, given to you by your place as a human. And so this is
Bro,
why.
how come there ain't people like this around anymore, dude? There's no like orators, there's no classic like, dude, you just don't have like thinkers getting up there and moving people and causing movements with like, this dude's on some shit.
I don't know what the answer. I'm not sure. I think the
like,
answer
you have
is that there
fucking
are
Joe
out
Biden.
there.
You've got like Joe
Okay,
Biden's
yeah.
and Bernie Sanders and
Sanders,
Donald
dude.
Trump's, dude.
What do you mean?
Yeah, Sanders is a fucking
I had
clown.
Sanders in mind too.
You don't get see, you don't get pumped because he doesn't speak your language. I get pumped when I hear Sanders get like active about some shit. Like, I'm sorry you don't get to enjoy him, but like I do.
If it makes you feel any better, I don't get pumped when I hear Donald Trump speak either. But I put them in.
I would hope
I
not.
put them all in the same bucket as fucking. They all suck.
So yes, I think, Howard, you've sort of expressed like this idea, but you know, whenever you are in a civil rights struggle, you are confining yourself to the jurisdiction of Uncle Sam. He doesn't want us to be in a civil rights struggle. Elsewhere, he says he criticizes the march on DC that happened in the previous year. And everyone was marching with MLK saying, "We shall overcome," singing that song, right? "We shall overcome." And he says, guys need to stop singing and start swinging. Is what he says, right? You know, start swinging like a boxer. It's very funny, right? It's just like stop with this sort of like chanting and holding a sign and you know, and oftentimes I feel very sympathetic to this. You know, I'm often I often bristle at the sort of climate marches or the March for Our Lives for gun control. I'm always just sort of like, you guys are going to do this and then go home. And what's the point of this, raise awareness? Like what, like, is that really the problem? I don't really think the awareness, lack of awareness is the issue. The issue is that there's like people in power that have interests that are not aligned with your movement. That's always how I sort of view popular political movements. And I think it's, Malcolm has the same sort of dissatisfaction with folks that are chanting and marching. Do you guys have any thoughts about that?
I think when you have assholes in power, like what they want you to do is to shut up and go away.
Mhm.
So if you feel comfortable enough not shutting up and not going away, it's always a lot more effective. The more people you have in your group, the louder your voice is. When you come together to take collective action, like it continually puts pressure on them and may sway some of the more middle ground people in Congress. The problem is, as you said, like all the assholes are buried so deep in there and they're like literally clinging on to life as they get wheeled around the Sacramento Senate in a wheelchair. Like, God damn, Dianne Feinstein, you need to be in a home. Like,
these motherfuckers are way too old.
Yes, there is that. So where do all the young people go to, like our generations and like younger, we're all on the internet, we're all on Twitter, right? Well, now the people at the top of these tech companies that control that global communication platform have now kind of completely ruined it, right? So it's sometimes I'm of the mind that it's only a matter of time before bullets start flying. I'm right, like Malcolm X, like I think he knew what was coming, right? When he's literally there trying to tell a white dude like, well, no, like you wrote the Constitution for yourselves. And, we're not going to buy that anymore. So, yeah, they're everywhere. They're not just in our government. They're in the biggest corporations, not just in America, but in the entire world. So we have so many people across our country that are disenfranchised who maybe wouldn't normally have been disenfranchised back during this time. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I just really like this quote. I just decided to throw it on here. It's again with this idea of like moving beyond the United States for like answers. And again, I'm always just wondering exactly where does he draw the line? Because it's certainly a sort of like look inward. Us black people have to get ourselves out of this. If you guys have seen the movie, there's a movie about Malcolm X's life. I forgot who plays. Has anyone seen that movie?
Yes, and I'm blanking out on his name too.
Who plays him?
Denzel?
Of course, Denzel Washington. That's right. Yeah. Well, and then so it dramatizes a really famous moment where he writes about it later, but like he calls it the white co-ed. There's a white co-ed, a white, girl in college who's like very supportive of the Black freedom movement, and she runs up to him in the street and she says like, "What can I do to help you? I'm so much, I really want to do something. What can I do?" And he says nothing. He says nothing, and he just keeps walking, right? And he writes about this. There's a big long history of like analyzing this moment. Like, what was he saying in this moment? What does that mean? Do you guys have any thoughts about that? What, like, nothing. There's nothing you could do.
Yeah, like
as
how
a
can you
white
truly
person.
sympathize with what this really means or like what this is. Like you're so far separated from it. How are you gonna know our
That's good.
struggle?
I think as a first pass answer, that's a really good idea. That like you can be an ally, but your allyship is going to be so limited because you have no real sense of what it's like, and so there's nothing there. Yeah.
Maybe he was trying to tell her, like, you don't need to do anything. You're not the problem.
Okay. I don't think. I mean, yeah. I don't think he would say like you are the problem. Maybe he would. That's not where I'm going. I'll have to think about that one. But yeah.
Sorry. I mean, realistically, what can she do? You know,
Okay.
she's
Yeah.
in as much as the same position as he is. Like, how is she also going to be able to affect?
He wasn't being a
Yeah.
feminist in this moment,
No.
unfortunately.
I wasn't saying he was being a feminist.
Oh, okay, okay.
No, I
Just
was
like as
just
an
saying that no, you
individual, yeah.
literally can't do anything, lady. You know,
Okay,
like
got
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, the forces we're fighting forces that are national at scale, embedded power structures. Where like you on an individual level, you're not
Yeah.
gonna be able to do anything. I could see that. There is one like very common interpretation that pretty much everybody agrees is right, and we haven't gotten there yet. I mentioned it when I said something like what's important to Malcolm is this sort of Lockean lineage that like it's a do it for yourself. Human rights are God-given. They're not granted by the government. And they fall back to you once they're being threatened by government, right? Like it's an incumbent upon yourself is the sort of Lockean idea. And so when he says to the white co-ed, there's nothing you can do to help. What is he saying? Well, he's saying there's nothing you can do to help. It's not your fault, but it's incumbent upon us that like our humanity has been denied in this situation. And so overcoming it requires that we show our humanity. We have to do it. We cannot be granted something that is already ours, which is our right to life, liberty, and property. We will be fighting for it as an expression of its existence. So our fight for it is how we get it back. It's not like we will win it back. The fighting for it is the important part. That's how we show our humanity in a system that is designed to deny it. That's the sort of like very common interpretation of that moment. He is not saying to the white co-ed that it's your, not your job or something like that. He's saying that like, no, it's like our responsibility, and it's how we show our humanity. And that's important. Like that's the important part, is that we actually fight for it. Not that we like, rub enough elbows in Congress or, get a sympathetic white lawmaker to pass a bill for us or something like that. No, we have to fight for it. And the fighting is when we win.
Savage.
Does that make any sense? Like it's like the uprising itself is the point. Because that's how we show that we are human. And so these rights, they become alive and real in their enactment, in their expression is like fighting for them. The right to life, liberty, and property becomes real when you fight for it, not when it's like granted to you by the passage of some new law. I think that's the best way to explain it. And so he's simply saying that's what we must do. It's not, you can't go tell your friends to join our struggle, and that won't mean anything. It's, we have to do it ourselves. So that's Malcolm X, and I really like this picture because this picture shows him holding hands, shaking hands with MLK, with Martin Luther King. And of course, the story that we get told is that Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were not friends. They disagreed. They had a distinct, ideas, and they were often at cross purposes. When I think that the reality is a lot more complicated than that. I think Malcolm X was a lot more comfortable talking in that sort of like Lockean, pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of way, that like the rights, fighting for the rights themselves are the important part, and we're not afraid to meet the denial of our humanity with violence. I think that's a way to describe Malcolm X. I don't think Martin Luther King has much to disagree with about, but of course his lasting legacy is the legacy of nonviolence, right? That's the one that that's the idea that we associate with MLK. But there is a lineage here. There is a sort of connection, and I think it's I think it'll become alive here. So the work that I like to refer to as the letter from Birmingham jail. Martin Luther King is thrown in jail for protesting, and there's what ends up happening is some supporters of Martin Luther King, some like there are some local priests, local clergymen who write to Martin Luther King. They write him a letter saying, "Hey, you're getting we're on your side, but you're doing too much, right? Why don't you calm down? We're actually working with our friends in Congress. Like we know that you need some help, that your freedom struggle is important. Why don't you let us do our work? Like we'll do the political work. We're writing the letters, we're going to the meetings. Why are you out here like boycotting and like leading marches and like getting in the way of proper functioning of the country? Why are you like walking in the street with all your friends? Why are you boycotting the buses? Why are you sitting in on lunch counters? Why are you impeding economic activity?" More or less. Let us do the political work. Stop getting in the way. You're actually causing people to be against your cause. You're actually you're turning people off, right? And so I'm saying all this because it's supposed to remind you of debates that we've been having over the past few years about, effective protests and things like that. But so this is what Martin Luther King has to say about his practice of nonviolent direct action, right? And I entitled this slide and the next slide "King, Socrates, and Nonviolent Gadflies," because there's a linkage here between Martin Luther King and Socrates. And so this is what he says. He says, "Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. My citing the creation of tension as part of the work of the nonviolent resistor may sound rather shocking, but I must confess I am not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly opposed violent tension, but there's a type of constructive, nonviolent tension which is necessary for growth. Just as Socrates felt it was necessary to create a tension in the mind so that individuals could rise from the bondage of myths and half-truths to the unfettered calm of creative analysis and objective appraisal, so must we see the need for nonviolent gadflies to create the kind of tension in society that will help men rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding and brotherhood." So I guess one way to sort of get us at what he's talking about here, let's think back to Socrates, because you guys all love Socrates so much. What was the tension that Socrates was creating? What is King talking about here when he brings up Socrates? What's the tension that Socrates was trying to bring about that he thought was going to help us think or whatever?
When you say the tension, are you referring to like the concept of like living like a life well lived, or like the ultimate, like what it meant to be human, or something different?
I mean that like Socrates was a gad, like the image of the gadfly, which is like the fly that buzzes around a horse's head that keeps them awake.
Oh, how that dude would like walk up to dudes in the fucking market and like poke them and prod them and ask them like
Right.
crazy ass rhetorical questions and got it. Okay, I didn't. It makes sense.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That like so remember the stories of Socrates. He's walking around town, bugging everybody, asking everybody what justice is, getting on everybody's nerves. But nonetheless, he sort of created a lasting legacy of questioning, of introspection, of looking at the world around you and not taking it as given that what's being presented to you is true or is right, right? And so the idea here is that Socrates is sort of creating a break from the mundane, the normal. He's forcing us to look at something, forcing us to become awake. And in that process, we are alerted to a mistake that we've been making, an incorrect assumption. We're alerted to injustice, right? And so what is King talking about? So King sort of like analogizing himself or analogizing his movement, the things he's advocating for. The things he's advocating for again are sort of like bus boycotts, like boycotting certain like forms of economic activity in the South that would sort of cause tension, for lack of a better word. Sit-ins, marches on the streets, the sorts of things we see on social media now that I think are designed to annoy us or to make us feel annoyed at the people doing it. The ones that are like sort of like standing in the middle of the street, blocking traffic. This is King's nonviolent action. That's what he has in mind. And so he's sort of describing it as creating a tension in society that he thinks is necessary for growth. Do you guys agree with that? What do you guys think? So he says here, I have the letter right here. I don't know if you guys can see this, but he says he's talking to the folks that have sent him a letter. They've sent him, the clergymen have sent him a letter saying, calm down, stop sitting in the middle of the streets, stop leading marches. Look, you're getting thrown into jail. You're causing people to not be on your side anymore. And so he says, you deplore the demonstrations taking place in Birmingham, but your statement, I am sorry to say, fails to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about the demonstrations. I am sure that none of you would want to rest content with the superficial kind of a social analysis that deals merely with effects and does not grapple with underlying causes. It is unfortunate that demonstrations are taking place in Birmingham, but it is even more unfortunate that the city's white power structure left the Negro community with no alternative. And so like I'm reminded of the protests that erupted in the wake of the George Floyd murder, that like there was a lot. I remember all the discussions that were happening, and perhaps it's a good discussion to have about like what's the proper response to this, like but the sort of the uprisings that occurred, it wasn't particularly in response to that one single event, but this was after a long line of perhaps constant police lynchings of Black people, and so the movements that arise after that can be criticized for better or for worse, but to discuss their what the proper response is without discussing the actual problem, without discussing the problem of police lynching people, seems, at least to Martin Luther King here, seems to be missing the point, right? That like, we don't want to be disrupting economic activity in Birmingham. We don't want to be doing demonstrations, but why would you talk about that and not the thing that we're trying to draw attention to? Yeah. We had no alternative except to prepare for direct action, whereby we would present our very bodies as a means of laying our case before the conscience of the local and the national community. Elsewhere, he says, you may well ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? You are quite right in calling for negotiation. Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a, and this is what I quoted earlier, and foster such a, where did I go? And foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks so to dramatize the issues so it can no longer be ignored. My citing the creation of tension as part of the work of the nonviolent resistor may sound rather shocking, but I must confess that I am not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly opposed violent tension, but there's a type of constructive nonviolent tension which is necessary for growth. There's so many bangers in this, guys. I highly recommend reading it. What is this making you guys think about? Is this bringing up anything?
Unions.
Oh, okay, unions again. So King was famously very pro-union, and at the end of his life, many think the FBI murdered him because of his sort of economic populist turn. his turn towards socialism. Many people think is why he was assassinated. Yeah, and unions are very much the sort of the site of collective action. You know, their purpose is typically, you know, it's baked into their mission objective is to do direct action and things like that. So very good. Anything else on King? I have another idea here to talk about, but we can move on. Do you guys want to talk about Black Lives Matter and what that was? We're far enough away from 2020 to we can have a sort of retrospective about it. Oops.
Well, it's because some policemen were really racist and killed a guy for no fucking reason.
Right. Over and over again, right? I mean, you know, from Freddie Gray to Sandra Bland to, you know, like there's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of names of people that are just murdered by the police.
Well, what's really crazy is that it's just like nothing happened, you know?
Right.
Like nothing has changed really, you know. There's still we
That's
still
right.
don't have an amendment that makes that says women are equal, you know, like there it's just I don't know. It's crazy to me that, you know, it takes 50 years for these guys' teachings to become kind of commonplace, you know.
Yeah, it is sort of sad to I've thought about that a few times because I remember 2020 felt pretty different. I remember like staying up all night like watching Twitch streams of, you know,
of domestic terrorists fucking destroy people's property and cover it up sure. as like a social justice movement. Yeah, for sure.
You could say that, sure. I mean, we can talk
it's
about
crazy
that.
Because the riots of 94 happened like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever that is, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
For something very, very similar.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, this happens every, you know, it seems to happen every so often.
Exactly. It keeps happening over and over again, and yet there's not
nothing
really
happens. Yeah.
I guess what really bugs me, dude,
for the reduction of police funding, which was interesting. I think that might be unique, maybe.
I don't think the police were ever the police weren't actually defunded in any real
way. No, I'm saying there was like a push for it though. Like it became there became this discussion talking about.
And I think I think for the worse, right? Like wasn't it used as a sort of like this is why you can't vote for Democrats kind of thing, like because they wanted to fund the police.
Yes. Yeah. Rightfully so.
And it ended up not
incorrectly. They were like, we should defund the police instead of like investing back into the communities.
Yeah, dude, right? So here's what I don't get. How is it that like a genius like Malcolm X, this dude that's just spitting hot fire, like this concept of like, let's fucking revolt in defense of our property and our rights as human beings. How does that get perverted into like, let's fucking loot in the streets and let's defund police because there's a bunch of bad apples that need to be fucking excised and there needs to be better training and investment?
Well, I
And
guess
so
my direct answer to that is like, what do you feel like a reasonable revolt in the streets and Malcolm X spitting hot fire? Like, what do you agree with about that? And what does that look like to you
I don't
besides what
know.
happened?
First of all, I don't think that what happened was productive at all. But if you want to talk about revolt, why
Yeah,
aren't they
like what's
fucking
a
storming?
reasonable, what is the difference between a revolt and then the other thing you said where you said something along the lines of
Why aren't they storming police stations? And why aren't they storming police stations and government buildings as opposed to like
They
people's
literally
fucking
took
property?
over the Seattle fucking, what do you mean? They did
Dude,
that.
they were burning fucking.
They did that.
First of all, I don't agree with any of that shit because this whole Black Lives Matter thing is a fucking joke. But if I want to answer Maverick's question for sake of like intellectual, engagement.
Well, yeah, I'm just curious, like, what's the difference to you? So you agree with Malcolm X and the right to bear arms when your people are feeling oppressed?
Absolutely.
Right. So
Yeah.
then, but
I don't believe that. I don't believe that
Matter,
that's what's been. I don't believe that that's what happened with any of this. I think these are two different things, to be clear. But if I'm gonna
really,
like play
because
the
I
game,
find them to be very, very similar. One, we have Malcolm X talking specifically about Black lives and their right to revolt violently, and then at the same time, when that actually happened, you're saying that that was incorrect. So I think there's a little bit of.
well, I'm
I'm
saying
just a
no.
little
Well, so there's a
confused.
couple things. I think one, I'm saying it was incorrect in that the justification that they use to do it, I don't personally agree with. Now, obviously, that's okay. If to them, they're like, yo, this is like right in line with what Locke was saying, by all means, I support their right to do that. I also support the right of the institutions to like equally violently to quell the uprising and put them down, right? And fucking if they want to take to the streets armed, then other people are going to take to the streets armed in kind. But I totally support their right if they feel like this is the line that can't be crossed to fucking do it. So it's going to be met with similar force. But if you want me to engage in like the intellectual exercise of like what is different about this time,
Yeah,
a
it
revolt
seems
is
like
like,
you're okay with revolt as long as it happens in a particular way, I guess.
no,
And like
so there's two
certain
pieces.
buildings are rated and other buildings aren't rated, and
I
or
think
certain people are killed and other people aren't killed, or like it's very clean, there's no collateral damage.
well, I don't think that there's such thing as there being no collateral damage. The first piece is that I don't believe that this was sufficient justification for a revolt, right?
What specifically wasn't sufficient justification?
Dude, you had some murderous cops kill people unjustifiably, and those cops need to be imprisoned for it. End of discussion. Right?
They weren't, so they revolted. I don't understand.
What are you fucking talking about? The dude that killed George Floyd is in prison.
That's one example out of hundreds where it's gone undealt with.
Well, I think it's really easy to sit here and like say, oh, this person died at the hands of police and the police are the bad guys because the other person's dead. When it's like, what about the fucking things that those people did to put themselves in those situations? Right? Are there cases of police that are like unjustifiably using violence? Absolutely. And they need to be prosecuted for it. Are there a lot of other cases where criminals fucking put themselves in bad situations committing crimes?
Yeah, totally. So you agree with the fact that there are police doing things that shouldn't be, that like there's
of course
being committed by police. And so I think really the justification for those revolts was revolved around, hey, you guys, we've been saying this loudly and over and over and over again for a long enough period of time. And we feel as a people that we are not being heard or responded to with enough fervor to change the things that are continually happening. And then there was all these statistics and the news got really, they were like, look, this happened again. And this time it was like in a really violent, horrible way. But look at the other 100 times that it's happened, and like look at the 100 times where police aren't being held accountable. Also, I just want to mention that that guy was put in jail. Those men were put in jail because of the riots. I don't necessarily think that they would have been held accountable to the same regard in any way had that not happened. And so like I hear what you're saying, but I just think that we need to be really careful about drawing the line between what is a reasonable protection of our rights and our right to bear arms against those doing harm against us, and then when it's not okay to do that. Like I don't know if we can stand on both sides of the aisle there.
Well, I think you can, because I think we all get to make the personal decision of like what's one step too far over the line, right? And I respect you saying no, that was a justifiable reason for these people to take to the streets of Long Beach and like take over a city block in Seattle and fucking let people die under their watch and commit fucking untold numbers of crimes. And to you, that dude George Floyd dying was like the one step too far where that's all justified. To me, it's not, right? So I think that's simply just a matter of like of how far you think that in what direction and how far that line has to be crossed for you to justify violent revolt. For me, that ain't it, right? For me, that's like a lot of police need to be brought to justice, and there needs to be systemic change in the way that policing is done and the way that training is done, and there needs to be a lot of these things
No,
that
I
are
think
coming
we
into
agree
play.
on
Like
that. I actually think we agree on that. What I think we
But
disagree
Howard,
on is what happens
Howard,
after that, after you've said that enough times, like systemic change needs to happen, systemic change needs to happen. How many times, when do you feel it's appropriate? How many times do we need to say that until it's reasonable to revolt?
well, I guess I get again this, and it's really hard for me. To me, when I think of revolt, right? When I think about Malcolm X, and I'm like, fuck yeah, like this is I really vibe what this dude's saying. It's like I'm talking about the revolt where it's like a civil uprising where we like topple a government, where we like form militias to protect ourselves, and where there's like there's like a paradigm shift in rulership, right? I just don't see that equating to like some really evil motherfuckers on the police force that need to be put down. Like for sure, no argument there. That doesn't equate to like let's fucking do untold millions and millions of dollars of damage to innocent people's stuff and take over city blocks like in just like a fucking wanton display of anger and frustration that's completely unproductive. Right now, if you're telling me like, well, Howard, these body cams and these things wouldn't be instituted if they hadn't done that. Okay, maybe I can hear that argument, and I'm still not going to like quite be there with you, but maybe there's some truth to that. And maybe you're like, you know what, if they hadn't made this much noise, then change wouldn't be happening in some of those areas. And like, it's still hard for me to like subscribe to that, but that's an argument I could listen to.
I guess
Doesn't mean
I also want to ask you what specifically like in terms of a riot to change some sort of policy, or in terms of a protest to change some sort of policy, like not like strikes are effective, absolutely, but at a certain
sure.
time, like in order to change policy, like shit has to get kind of crazy, you know. And so the word revolt you know, is like, to me, is like very, it's like where are it kind of honestly is like, well, specifically your whole thing is like that's where the power should lie, is with the
Yeah,
people,
no, I
not with the
agree.
government,
I
you know. So
agree.
like I
Again,
would figure you would be applauding them, you know.
I agree, and I just told you that I do. It's just for me, this is not something that justifies it, right? If you were telling me that these people did this because all of a sudden, like our freedom of speech was being shut down, forced to like pray to some fucking, you know, theocratic rule, and all of a sudden like we had to do X, Y, and Z with our kids, like blah 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 blah, those things out for me personally, those are the lines where I'm like, yo, everyone get your guns, we're storming City Hall, let's fucking do this. This one just isn't it for me, right? Good, right,
Okay.
wrong, indifferent, up, down, or backwards, that's just my truth.
Because this isn't your fight, Howard.
Yeah, it didn't affect you. It's
Yeah.
like easy. It's super easy for you to say that, you know, like these weren't friends of yours. You don't see this happening to your community day in and day out with nothing having been done, you know? Like I
Well,
agree with you. It is not, you are not personally affected by, this is not your fight. You don't agree with it. Like, but do you have empathy for the people that it did
Yeah,
happen to?
I just said I think all those police officers should be brought to justice. There's fucking no argument there, without a doubt. I think that it's disgusting conduct, and we need to invest more money in police forces. No argument there, right? So it's not that I lack empathy. I share tremendous, even though a lot of these people are criminals that are dying, even though, you know, these people are like convicted felons, oftentimes mid commission of a crime. I still have empathy for it, just because you're a felon mid crime. I still have empathy for it. I think that these.
All right, Howard, I'm muting you because you're not because I disagree with what you're saying, but because I can't deal. Your connection sucks.
Reconnect, Howard. We didn't hear anything the last like 4 or 5 sentences.
I just
I gotta mute him.
Please mute him.
Reconnect.
It like won't let me mute him now. It's either I boot him. Okay.
Yeah,
Check it
yeah,
out,
lift.
So MLK has this to say about what he calls the white moderate. Okay, he says, I must make 2 honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than the absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that law and order exist for the purposes of establishing justice, and that when they fail in this purpose, they become the dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress. I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that the present tension in the South is a necessary phase of the transition from an obnoxious negative peace in which the Negro passively accepted his unjust plight to a substantive and positive peace in which all men will respect the dignity and worth of human personality. Actually, we who engage in nonviolent direct action are not the creators of tension. We merely bring to the surface the hidden tension that is already alive. We bring it out in the open, where it can be seen and dealt with, like a boil that can never be cured so long as it is covered up, but must be opened with all its ugliness to the natural medicines of air and light. Injustice must be exposed with all the tension its exposure creates, to the light of human conscience and to the air of natural opinion before it can be cured. That's what he has to say about the white moderate.
Who was saying that?
That's Martin Luther King. Letter from
Got it.
Birmingham jail. Well, we don't have much time left. I think we normally end at 6:30. The last thing that I could talk about is about this there King harkens back to these 2 types of laws. There's God's law and then there's man's law. And you know, when man's law sort of runs into conflict with God's law, that's where we need to engage in nonviolent tension. But since Howard is back, I wondered, did you want to finish your thought? Or
I can't remember what I was going to say. I guess my point is just that I think that as opposed to burning city blocks, but look, you know, I'm thinking, like, taking a step back. I was going to say something, but as I take a step back and think about what you guys are saying, what? You can't hear me?
It's just really bad.
It's really bad.
Are you going to meditation?
Hold on. Can you guys?
I think so. I think you're better now. Well,
God just doesn't want you to have a platform, my man. I'm
we're
sorry.
done. We're done with that. So, yeah, I
All
mean,
right,
so,
here it is. Here it is.
okay.
This is what I was
all
gonna say. I had a whole response, but the truth is, when I take a step back and I think about what you guys said, I had a whole thing about it doesn't really matter. I'm not in the shoes. Like, I haven't sat there and watched members of my community die. I haven't sat there and fucking watched, my kids get gunned down, whether they were committing crimes or not, whether they were in bad places that they put themselves in or not. I haven't had to experience that. And so I can sit here and draw a hard line and say, like, no, that is not a valid justification for a violent revolt. No, that doesn't pass the fucking smell test for what. Dude, maybe I would feel differently if I was fucking in a poor community and every other day people that I knew were, and now that's hyperbole, let's get real. But if I was in a poor community and I did feel unfairly targeted and I did feel like the deck was stacked against me, then maybe I would feel differently. So it's tough for me to sit here after listening to what you guys say and like say, no, fuck off, you guys are wrong, just because logically that doesn't add up to me, I'm right. Like, I don't know, maybe I would feel differently if I was in that spot, and this would pass the fucking smell test for violent revolt.
We love
It's
it.
just, if I'm being honest with you guys, it's just not my truth. I'm not there, I don't see it. But I also recognize that, like, my vantage point is very different than the family members of a George Floyd. And so,
Hell
yeah, I
yeah,
don't
dude.
know. I mean, I
Hell
guess
yeah,
that's to
Howard.
say that, like,
Politics as vision.
I'm still not saying I believe that Black Lives Matter is anything other than a domestic terror organization, because I fucking think that it is. But I also recognize that, maybe in the minds of some people, and maybe even in my mind, if my situation were different, that would be warranted. I don't know.
Dude,
I want to be
I love
clear
it.
that like in no way is my counter argument to you trying to justify the actions of individuals who took their frustration out on private businesses. That is absolutely abhorrent, right? But what I feel like you're missing is that, like, nobody can determine what civil unrest is going to look like. All these people we have talked about, every single one of them, Locke, Hobbes, they all have the stipulation of, hey, if this doesn't work, do something about it, right? They don't say how. They're not like, hey, don't attack the private businesses, only
so
go
true.
after the civic community areas. Like, there's and who would fall? It's human nature. Like, you're mad, you have rage, and it's going to look like shit. A riot is not ever going to be a civil thing, right? So I just want to find this middle ground where it's like, I don't have as strong feelings as you do about like what Black Lives is or is not, but like, you can have all the justifications you want of like what you deem should, justify what is going to happen as we try to change this thing. But like, you're one person, and like mob mentality is fucking crazy, So that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah,
I love it. I think we made a lot of progress today. This was really great. I loved hearing all that. So we're gonna end with this quote. Lamentably, it is a historical fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. This is like a truth in like everybody in political science like sort of knows this. There really is no way to sort of peaceably dismantle a power structure. It just doesn't happen. There's no sort of like arc towards justice, to use a King phrase, that happens without whether you use like the King's tension or Malcolm X's violence. Like there's always some sort of like somebody's losing in this situation, and nobody decides to lose. And so even if like there's a sort of self-acceptance of injustice, that like you are committing injustice as a white person or a benefiter of a white power structure, there's just simply no sort of self in a grand scale. There's nothing historically that suggests that like white people will sort of voluntarily grant equal status. And so, you know, this is the sort of underwriting thought of both Malcolm X and MLK, but also of Locke. You know, this is like Locke's message to us was that you express your humanity by fighting for your rights. And so I think that's where we end today. Next week is a lot of fun. Actually, so I don't know. I don't want this devolve into another fight. I think we're going to do Monday night, Monday night at 8. We'll talk about it in the group text, but that's when we're going to talk about unions. And that's going to be our introduction into Marxian thought. We're going to talk about Eugene Debs on Monday, and he will give us the sort of American gloss of Marxism, which will help us sort of just get our brains into that place, and then we can actually read Marx too.
Okay, good, because there's a few guys who I employ who kind of like got together and said they wanted some things from me, and so what I did was I had to let them go.
Yeah, so that's illegal. but yeah, we'll talk about that. All right, guys.
All right.
See you later.
All right,
Thanks,
Bye.
thanks, Brian.
Bye.
Thanks.